Welcome to another new episode. Today's episode is dealing with cell membranes and transport. Hey, if you are new to this channel, hit that subscribe button to represent the Bio Squad. Also, do like this video. And if you aren't new, well, appreciate the support and do continue watching. Let's get into it. Question 1. Which processes allow movement into and out of a cell? 1. Active transport. 2. Diffusion. 3. Facilitated diffusion. 4. Osmosis. Key thing you should know is that all 4 processes actually allow substances to move into and out of a cell. Why? Because all 4 processes are methods of transport. Active transport is a method where energy is required. The others, diffusion, facilitated diffusion and osmosis, are passive processes. They do not require energy. However, all processes do allow the movement into and out of a cell. Hence the answer is D. 1, 2, 3 and 4. Question 2. Some plant and animal cells were placed in different solutions and the results are shown. Which cells were placed in which solution? If you look carefully at the diagrams given, cell 3 and cell 5 appear to have changed shape by losing water. Hence they must be placed in a solution where there is the highest concentration among the 2 solutions given, that is 1 mole per dm cube of sucrose and 0.1 mole per dm cube of salt solution. Obviously 1 mole per dm cube of sucrose solution will have the highest concentration. Hence more water will be lost by the given cells, leading to the appearance being cell 3 and cell 5. Therefore under 1 mole per dm cube of sucrose, cell 3 and cell 5 should be present, leaving us with the answer being D. Why are the other answers incorrect? It is because the other answers consist of cells that do not seem to have lost any water. Hence they cannot be placed in a solution where there is a higher concentration. Because higher the concentration of the external solution, water will be lost, leaving the cell changed in shape. However, the other cells appear to have no change in shape. Hence the answer is D. Under 1 mole per dm cube of sucrose, it is 3 and 5. Under 0.1 mole per dm cube of salt solution, it is 2 and 4. Question 3. The diagram shows the transport of ions across the cell surface membrane. Inside the cell, there is a low concentration of sodium ions and a high concentration of potassium ions. Outside the cell, there is a low concentration of K+ and a high concentration of Na+. The carrier molecule is a pump which exchanges Na+ for K+ ions. Which ionic movements are represented by the arrows? Keywords over here are the concentrations of the respective ions such as Na+ and K+. Inside the cell, there is a low concentration of Na+ and a high concentration of K+. Outside the cell, it is the opposite. There is a high concentration of Na+ and a low concentration of K+. And if you look at the carrier pump or the carrier molecule is only involved in active transport. Hence, 2 and 3 represent processes that are of active transport, where they occur against the concentration gradient, that is from low concentration to high concentration. Therefore, arrow 3 represents the active transport of sodium ions and arrow 2 represents the active transport of potassium ions, because you should follow the concentration differences, that is from low to high, and the arrowhead which points to the respective directions, leaving us with the answer being either A or B. If you look at the other arrows, arrow 1 and arrow 4, they represent diffusion because they do not involve any carrier molecules, and diffusion is a process where movement of ions occurs down a concentration gradient, that is from high to low. Therefore, arrow 4 represents the diffusion of K+ ions because arrow 4 moves from high concentration of K+ to low concentration of K+, and arrow 1 represents the diffusion of Na+ ions because the arrow 1 shows the movement from high concentration of Na+ to low concentration of Na+. Hence the answer is A. Question 4. Plant cells were immersed in solutions of different water potential and left for 1 hour. Which row shows the effect of different solutions on the plant cells? Key thing you should know is that more negative means lower the water potential and vice versa. That is, more negative the solution, lower the water potential. Less negative the solution, higher the water potential. If the solution is more negative, that is low water potential, water would leave the cell causing it to be flaccid. Hence, if you go through the options A, B, C and D, and if you look at the column more negative, it should be flaccid, leaving us with the only possible answer, that is C. Under less negative, it is turgid. Under equal, it is unchanged. Obviously, it should be unchanged. Why? Because equal represents an isotonic solution where there is no concentration difference or no water potential gradient created. Hence, no change in shape of cell as water doesn't leave or enter the cell. Hence, it remains unchanged. For more negative, it should be flaccid because more negative means lower the water potential of the external solution. Hence, water will move out from the plant cells to the external solution down a water potential gradient. Therefore, the plant cell would be flaccid because it loses water. Flaccidity is caused when a plant cell loses water. Turgid is caused by a plant cell gaining water. Hence, the answer is C. Question 5. Diagram shows part of a cell surface membrane. Which molecules have both hydrophobic and hydrophilic regions? Phospholipid molecules has a hydrophilic head and two hydrophobic tails. Therefore, yes, one which represents a phospholipid molecule does have both hydrophobic and hydrophilic regions, leaving us with the answer being either A, B or C. 3 lies only towards the watery surroundings, hence it has no hydrophobic regions. If you look at the part labeled as 3, it is towards the outside surface of the membrane, hence it lies in the watery regions. That means it is hydrophilic only. It doesn't have a hydrophobic region. Therefore, 3 doesn't represent both hydrophobic and hydrophilic regions, whereas the other molecules do. 2, 4 and 5, yes, they do have both hydrophobic and hydrophilic regions. Why? Because 2, 4 and 5, they have structures that face towards the outside watery surroundings, as well as a part of the structure is towards the center of the membrane. That is, it lies in a hydrophobic region where no water is found. Hence, the answer is C. 1, 2, 4 and 5 only. Question 6. Increasing which type of bond helps to increase the fluidity of the cell surface membrane? Key thing you should know is that the fluidity of a membrane is increased by either cholesterol molecules or double bonds between carbon atoms of the phospholipid tails. Therefore, if you go to the answers A, B, C and D, the best possible answer is C. Carbon-carbon double bond, because when there are double bonds present, that means more bent tails. More bent tails means more fluidity or increased fluidity of the cell surface membrane. Hence, the answer is C. Question 7. The table shows 3 processes that contribute to transport across cell surface membranes. Which processes are the result of random movement of molecules? Osmosis and diffusion are definitely a result of random movement. Hence, if you go to the answers A, B, C and D, with diffusion and osmosis both having ticks representing random movement, the answer is B. And yes, all 3 processes are passive processes which are caused by their random movement only. Hence, the answer is B. Question 8. What is the role of cholesterol in the cell surface membrane? A. To assist active transport. B. To assist facilitated diffusion. C. To provide hydrophilic channels. D. To regulate fluidity of the membrane. You should know that cholesterol's role is to regulate the fluidity and stability of the membrane. Hence, the best possible answer being D. To regulate the fluidity of the membrane. Why are the other answers incorrect? A. To assist active transport. No, cholesterol is not involved in active transport at all. Hence, it is incorrect. B. To assist facilitated diffusion. Again, cholesterol doesn't assist any such movement. Therefore, B is incorrect. C. To provide hydrophilic channels. That is obviously incorrect because cholesterol is a non-polar molecule and it is hydrophobic in nature. Therefore, it cannot provide hydrophilic channels. Hydrophilic means water-loving, whereas cholesterol is a molecule which is water-hating or hydrophobic, leaving us with the best possible answer D. To regulate fluidity. Yes, cholesterol does help to regulate the stability, fluidity and flexibility of the membrane. Question 9. The diagram shows the water potential of 3 adjacent plant cells. In which directions will there be net movement of water by osmosis? Osmosis is a passive process where water moves from a higher water potential to regions of lower water potential. And how do you know which one has the highest water potential? Well, less negative the number, higher the water potential, and vice versa. Again, less negative the number, higher the water potential, more negative the number, lower the water potential. And if you go to the diagram, minus 800 kilopascals is the lowest negative number out of all the three given numbers. Hence, minus 800 kilopascals means it will have the highest water potential. Therefore, there should be an arrow pointing away from minus 800 kilopascals to minus 1200 and to minus 1000 kilopascals, which leaves us with the answer being D, because only D has arrows that point away from minus 800. Again, osmosis is the net movement where water moves from a higher water potential to regions of lower water potential. Both minus 1200 and minus 1000 is more negative than minus 800. Hence, they will have a lower water potential than minus 800, because more negative the number, lower the water potential, and vice versa. Therefore, since minus 800 is the lowest negative number over here, it will have the highest water potential, and higher the water potential, then the water will move from that cell which has minus 800 kilopascals to the other cells which has lower water potential. Hence, the answer is D. Question 10. Which role of the cell surface membrane is not a result of the properties of the phospholipids? A. To allow cytokinesis to occur in mitotic cell division. B. To allow entry and exit of the water-soluble gases oxygen and carbon dioxide. C. To allow phagocytosis of a bacterium into cells. D. To allow surface membranes to stabilize by binding with water molecules. A is a result of the properties of phospholipids due to its fluidity nature, because phospholipids of a cell surface membrane, well, they form part of the fluid nature of the membrane, because the cell surface membrane is described in terms of the fluid mosaic model, and fluid is caused by the properties of phospholipids, and cytokinesis does require the fluidity nature. Hence, it is a result of the properties of phospholipids. B. To allow entry and exit of the water-soluble gases. Yes, again, phospholipid molecules which form part of the cell surface membrane does allow the entry and exit. Therefore, is a result of the properties of phospholipids. C. To allow phagocytosis of a bacterium into cell. Yes, again, it is a result due to cell membrane forming a vesicle, because the cell membrane is able to change shape and form a vesicle by engulfing the bacterium. Hence, again, a result due to the properties of phospholipids assisted by its fluidity nature. D. To allow surface membranes to stabilize by binding with water molecules. That is not a result of the properties of phospholipids, because phospholipids have both hydrophilic and hydrophobic regions. However, D only talks about the hydrophilic nature, which is not a result of the properties of phospholipids, but rather due to other external factors, such as glycoproteins present in the cell surface membrane that allows surface membranes to stabilize by binding with water molecules. Hence, it is not a result of the properties of phospholipids. And since the question mentions not a result, the answer is D. All the other answers are a result of the properties of phospholipids. Question 11. Which processes that move substances across cell surface membranes result in an equilibrium? 1. Active transport. 2. Diffusion. 3. Facilitated diffusion. 4. Osmosis. Active transport doesn't result in equilibrium at all, since the movement is against a concentration gradient, that is, from low concentration to high concentration. All the other processes are down a concentration gradient, that is, from high to low concentration. Hence, they will result in an equilibrium eventually, whereas one will not lead to an equilibrium because the movement follows against a concentration gradient, and any process that follows against a concentration gradient cannot achieve equilibrium, leaving us with the answer being D, 2, 3 and 4 only. Question 12. Which statement about the fluid mosaic model of membrane structure is correct? Fluid refers to the protein molecules and the phospholipid molecules being able to move about within their own monolayers, and mosaic refers to the scattered pattern of proteins. However, over here they have mentioned the answers which talk about the fluidity nature, and in order to increase the fluidity, there should be either higher temperature or more unsaturated fatty acid chains. And if you go to the answers A, B, C and D, A, the less unsaturated the fatty acid change, the more fluid, that is incorrect. Because more unsaturated the fatty acid change, the more fluid. It is not less unsaturated which will lead to more fluidity. B, the more unsaturated the fatty acid change, the more fluid. Yes, that is correct. Therefore, B is the right answer. C, the higher the temperature, the less fluid the membrane. That is incorrect. Because higher the temperature, the more fluid the membrane, not less fluid. And D, the lower the temperature, the more fluid. That is also incorrect. Lower the temperature, less fluid the membrane. Because higher temperature leads to more fluidity and lower temperature leads to less fluidity. Question 13. Which is correct for components of a cell surface membrane? Increases membrane fluidity. Out of all the given answers, the obvious and most correct choice is cholesterol molecules, because cholesterol molecules are concerned with increasing the membrane fluidity. Hence the answer is A. Increases membrane fluidity is cholesterol. Allows recognition of cell is glycoproteins. The other answers, glycolipids, glycoproteins and phospholipids, they do not increase the membrane fluidity at all, leaving us with the answer being A. Question 14. Which statements are descriptions of both facilitated diffusion and active transport? 1. Moves substances against a concentration gradient. 2. Requires ATP. 3. Transports charged ions across the cell surface membrane. 4. Uses proteins. Key thing you should know is that the question refers to both facilitated diffusion and active transport. And yes, active transport, by the mention of its name, is an active process and hence requires ATP or energy, whereas facilitated diffusion is a passive process. It doesn't require ATP at all. And since the question mentions both facilitated diffusion and active transport, the answer should not have 2 in it, that is, requires ATP, leaving us with the best possible answer being D, 3 and 4 only, because all the other answers A, B and C consists of statement 2, requires ATP, which is not needed by facilitated diffusion. Question 15. What is the width of the cell surface membrane? You should remember that width of a membrane is around 7 nanometers. And if you go to the answers, the best possible answer is B, 5 to 10 nanometers, because 7 nanometers lies within that range. And all the other answers consist of a range which is not fitting with the answer being 7 nanometers. Hence the answer is B, 5 to 10 nanometers. Question 16. Some functions of molecules found in cell surface membranes are listed. Which are functions of cholesterol? 1. Cell recognition. 2. Ion transport. 3. Maintaining fluidity. 4. Mechanical stability. Listen to this carefully. Cholesterol molecules are involved mainly with FSF, that is fluidity, stability and flexibility. And if you go to the answers 1, 2, 3 and 4, the only possible answers are 3 and 4, maintaining fluidity as well as mechanical stability. It does not aid in cell recognition and it doesn't aid in ion transport, leaving us with the answer being D, 3 and 4 only. Question 17. Diagram represents a cell surface membrane. 3 pathways to the membrane are shown. Which process is represented by each arrow? Process 2 and process 3 involves a transport protein, whereas process 1 doesn't involve any transport protein. Therefore, process 1 should only be diffusion, leaving us with the answer being either B or C. Process 2 shows the movement from high concentration of substance to low concentration, that is down a concentration gradient. Hence, it is facilitated diffusion, because only facilitated diffusion involves down a concentration gradient. Active transport is the process which uses a transport protein, however, it is against a concentration gradient, that is from low concentration to high concentration. Therefore, 3 should represent active transport, 2 should represent facilitated diffusion, because it follows down a concentration gradient, leaving us with the answer being C. Question 18. Which set of factors will produce the most fluid cell surface membrane? A. An increase in proportion of phospholipids with saturated fatty acid chains, distance between phospholipid molecules. B. An increase in proportion of long fatty acid chains and proportion of phospholipids with unsaturated fatty acid chains. C. An increase in proportion of long fatty acid chains and temperature. D. an increase in proportion of phospholipids with unsaturated fatty acid chains, and temperature. Fluidity is affected by various factors such as temperature, presence of unsaturated fatty acid chains, and cholesterol molecules. Since the question refers to only phospholipid molecules and temperature, the best possible answer is D, proportion of phospholipids with unsaturated fatty acid chains and temperature. Why is that? Because if there is an increase in unsaturated fatty acid chains, the more fluid the membrane would be, and if there is an increase in temperature, also the more fluid the membrane would be. Since the question refers to most fluid cell surface membrane, D does have a set of factors that will produce the most fluid cell surface membrane. Why are the other answers incorrect? Let's look at C, proportion of long fatty acid chains. That is incorrect because shorter the fatty acid chains, more fluid. It is not long fatty acid chains that leads to more fluidity. Therefore, C is incorrect. B, proportion of long fatty acid chains. That is also again incorrect because it is not long fatty acid chains but rather short fatty acid chains. A, proportion of phospholipids with saturated fatty acid chains. That is incorrect because more fluidity is concerned with unsaturated fatty acid chains. Why is that? Because unsaturated fatty acid chains, they have a double bond, and presence of double bonds leads to bent tails. Bent tails leads to increased fluidity. Therefore, D is the correct choice. Question 19. Which descriptions are correct for transport across cell surface membranes? Active processes, passive processes. Key thing you should know is that active processes are only active transport, endocytosis, and exocytosis. Facilitated diffusion is not involved in active processes. Therefore, D is not the correct choice, leaving us with the answer being either A, B, or C. Let's look at passive processes. Answer A involves exocytosis, which is incorrect as exocytosis is an active process, hence A is incorrect. B. Answer B involves facilitated diffusion and osmosis, which are both passive processes, hence the correct answer should be B. Let's look at C. Again, C involves endocytosis under passive processes, and endocytosis is not a passive process but rather an active process. Hence, C is incorrect. Question 20. What explains the effect on a red blood cell of being placed into pure water? Pure water is a solution that has the highest water potential, hence water enters a red blood cell, no matter what. And when the water enters a red blood cell, then the cell swells and bursts. The cell doesn't shrink because water entering a cell leads to cell swelling up. Water leaving a cell leads to the cell shrinking. And since the water enters a red blood cell, the cell will swell. Considering between answers B and C, because B and C involves the cell swelling. B talks about more water entering the cell than leaving it, so the cell swells and bursts. Yes, that is a possible explanation. C, water enters the cell and none leaves it. That is incorrect because water can either enter the cell or leave the cell, because osmosis is a process where water molecules pass through the cell surface membrane in either direction, but mostly from higher water potential to lower water potential. However, some water molecules can also move the other way around. Therefore, C is incorrect because C mentions none leaves it. However, some water molecules are able to leave the cell, although most water molecules will enter the cell. Hence, B does represent a correct explanation. More water enters the cell than leaving it, so the cell swells and bursts. Question 21. Antimycin is a chemical that inhibits the function of mitochondria. Which methods of transport across the cell surface membrane would be inhibited by antimycin? 1. Active transport, 2. Facilitated diffusion, 3. Endocytosis. Mitochondria is an organelle which is concerned with ATP production or energy. Hence, active processes would be inhibited. And if you go to the methods of transport 1, 2 and 3, 2, which is facilitated diffusion, is a passive process, not an active process, as facilitated diffusion doesn't require ATP at all. Hence, method 2 would not be inhibited by antimycin, leaving us with the answer being only C, 1 and 3 only, because 1 and 3 are active processes and they do require energy, and since mitochondria, which is an organelle that produces energy, is inhibited, then active transport and endocytosis, which are active processes that require energy, would also be inhibited. Question 22. The cell surface membrane structure is described as a fluid mosaic. Which statement describes the mosaic part of the cell surface membrane? You should remember the definition of fluid mosaic. Fluid refers to proteins and phospholipid molecules being able to move within their own monolayers, and mosaic refers to scattered pattern of proteins. And if you go to the answers A, B, C and D, the best possible answer is D, the scattering of the different proteins within the phospholipid bilayer, because only answer D involves the mention of the word scattering of proteins. The other answers do not represent the meaning of the word mosaic. Hence, answer D is the correct choice. Question 23. The graph shows how the rate of entry of substance X into a cell changes as the concentration of substance X outside the cell increases. The diagram shows part of a cell surface membrane. Which pathways could substance X use to enter the cell? As you can see, the rate of entry of substance X increases initially and then reaches a plateau. Therefore, it should represent diffusion or either facilitated diffusion, because it follows a concentration gradient and eventually establishes an equilibrium. Because once an equilibrium is established, then only the rate of entry of a substance will not increase anymore. Hence, substance will enter the cell until it reaches equilibrium and no more entry takes place. Hence, it is either of diffusion or facilitated diffusion down a concentration gradient, because any processes that are moving down the concentration gradient will result in equilibrium. Hence, the answer is 1 and 2 only. Why is 3 incorrect? Because pathway 3 is not a transport protein and it is not a method of movement, because pathway 3 involves a glycoprotein or glycolipid, which is not involved in methods of transport that will lead to equilibrium, and is also not a transport protein that could result in facilitated diffusion. Only 2 represents a channel protein which will result in facilitated diffusion. Hence, the answer is A, 1 and 2. Question 24. Which of these substances can pass directly through cell surface membranes without using a carrier protein or a channel protein? 1. Ca2+, 2. Carbon dioxide, 3. C6H12O6. Key thing you should know is that small and nonpolar substances can pass through easily. Ca2+ is charged, hence it is polar. Therefore, polar molecules cannot pass through easily. Therefore, it won't pass directly through the cell surface membrane without using any transport proteins. C6H12O6 is again a large molecule. Hence, it will require some form of transport protein to move through the cell surface membrane, whereas carbon dioxide is nonpolar as well as a small molecule. Therefore, will pass directly through the cell surface membrane without using any transport protein. Hence, the answer is D, 2 only. Question 25. Companion cells use ATP to move hydrogen ions out of the cell and co-transporter proteins to allow hydrogen ions to return with sucrose molecules. Which 2 processes are involved in this movement? This question right here is regarding the loading of sucrose, and if you remember the chapter which is concerned with the transport of plants, you will definitely realize that active transport is involved, because they have mentioned ATP, and in plants where sucrose loading is involved, active transport is a process, hence either A or B. And then they have mentioned co-transporter proteins are involved to return the sucrose molecules along with the hydrogen ions. Therefore, if any transport protein is involved in order to return sucrose, it should be facilitated diffusion, not diffusion, because diffusion does not involve any transport proteins. However, facilitated diffusion does. Therefore, the answer is B. Active transport and facilitated diffusion are involved in this movement. Question 26. The formula shows how the rate of diffusion across the cell surface membrane can be calculated. Surface area times difference in concentration upon thickness of membrane. Which row shows how the fastest rate of diffusion can be achieved? The fastest rate of diffusion can be achieved by higher surface area and steeper concentration gradient, along with lower distance of diffusion, across which diffusion has to occur. Therefore, if the surface area is high and the difference in concentration is high, along with the thickness of membrane being low, then only the fastest rate of diffusion can be achieved, leaving us with the answer being B. Surface area available being high, difference in concentration being high, thickness of membrane being low. Because any product of 2 high values upon a low value will give you the fastest rate. Question 27. How could water molecules cross the cell surface membrane of animal cells? 1. Carrier proteins, 2. Channel proteins, 3. Cholesterol molecules. Water molecules are polar, hence cholesterol would not allow you to pass through it at all, as cholesterol is nonpolar and hydrophobic. Therefore, answers having cholesterol molecules are incorrect. Water molecules could pass simply through the cell surface membrane by diffusion, although it is polar due to its small size, or it could either use facilitated diffusion. And facilitated diffusion only involves channel proteins, not carrier proteins. Hence the answer is D, 2 only. Channel proteins are involved in facilitated diffusion, which allows the water molecules to cross the cell surface membrane of animal cells. Question 28. Which statements about the movement of water in and out of cells are correct? 1. Water moves from regions of more negative water potential to regions of less negative water potential. 2. Water can cross cell membranes by passing through channel proteins. 3. Water can pass through cellulose cell walls. Statement 1 is obviously incorrect. Why is that? Because they have mentioned water moving from more negative to less negative. However, it is the opposite way. Water moves from less negative to more negative, as more negative means lower the water potential. If you recall correctly, I have discussed it in an earlier question. More negative the number, lower the water potential. Less negative the number, higher the water potential. Therefore, water will move from regions of less negative water potential, that is high water potential, to regions of more negative water potential, that is lower water potential. Hence, answers having 1 in it are incorrect because statement 1 is incorrect, leaving us with the answer being D, 2 and 3 only. Water can cross cell membranes by passing through channel proteins. Yes, that is correct, and that process is called facilitated diffusion. Water can pass through cellulose cell walls. That is also correct, because cellulose cell walls are freely permeable in nature. Question 29. What can increase the fluidity of the cell surface membrane at low temperatures? 1. Double bonds between carbon atoms in the fatty acid chains. 2. Cholesterol. 3. Fatty acids having shorter chains. All three factors actually do help to increase the fluidity at low temperatures. Hence the answer should be A, 1, 2 and 3. Double bonds, yes, as I mentioned earlier, they lead to bent tails, and bent tails leads to increased fluidity. Cholesterol molecules, they do regulate the fluidity, stability and flexibility of a membrane. Hence, yes, it can increase the fluidity. 3. Fatty acids having shorter chains. Yes, shorter chains leads to increased fluidity. Therefore, the answer is A. Question 30. Which molecules are found at the outer surface of a cell surface membrane? Cholesterol, glycolipids and phospholipids. Cholesterol is nonpolar in nature and hydrophobic, hence it is found only towards the inner surface of a membrane, not found on the outer surface. Hence, under cholesterol it should be absent, leaving us with the only possible answer, that is D, because only D involves cholesterol being absent on the outer surface. Hence the answer is D. Cholesterol is absent, glycolipids are present, phospholipids are also present. That is the end of this episode. Do like and share this video with your friends if you haven't already. Thank you and stay tuned for more.